Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Pleasure to see you all here today. I'm Paul Pangaro. I'm president of the American Society for Cybernetics. My only role today is to thank you for coming, to invite you to see the other things we do at asc-cybernetics.org. And I'm sure there'll be an announcement later about other speakers in the speaker series to follow. But now I'll just hand it over to Pile.
Yes, and I'm the secretary of the society right now, and work with Jude Lombardi, who's also here and running this speaker series. So we had an interesting situation here. We had planned something for every month in the spring, and there was a cancellation for February. And so we got an alternative, and the alternative was all there in place last week, 2 weeks ago, and then all of a sudden that became a cancellation. So there was a need for a bit of a scramble. But I thought about some connections that I've had recently. Some years ago, I was invited to the Research and Design Conference, RSD 7 actually, and discovered there with a group of young people, the young people that have found design as a way of moving into the cybernetics kinds of thinking, the circularity. And there have been people invited from the ASC to that design conference, including Ranulph that was just mentioned now, Paul Pangaro, and many, many others here. I don't even have the years. So it became something, in that way, it's a sister organization, or maybe a younger organization that many of us are enjoying. So I went to the conference this fall, it was online, and there found many really evocative, interesting presentations. And the one of my, most heart-drawing ones was one by Cheryl Hsu. And I'd invited her to come and speak to a seminar series I had. So when this opportunity came up, I said, I wonder if she would be willing to come and speak with such a short notice to our group. And here she is. So I'd love to introduce you to Cheryl. I wish I knew more about her. I wish I had her as a friend for the last 20 years. But since that's not possible, I'm asking her to introduce herself and welcome. And I welcome her into this group because I think she is part of what I think of as our tribe. So please, Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Pile. And I am feeling unbelievably honored to be here. It was an interesting feeling to actually see all these faces begin to pop up in the Zoom room, some of whom I actually recognize. So I took the liberty of inviting some of my colleagues and friends as well. And this is a really beautiful opportunity, I sense, to cross-contaminate between the many worlds and spheres that we occupy together. So I'll introduce myself, but I'll actually have that as part of my presentation. So I'll share the screen now and go into that a little bit more deeply.
Oh, but while you're doing that, I'm also going to monitor the chat. And if you have questions, please put question at the very front so I can tell it apart from any chat you're doing. And if you have a comment that you really want to bring up, do the same, comment and then what you're saying. Then at the end, I'll start going through them and inviting people to speak to your questions and comments.
So I'll begin here. This is certainly a bit more of a traditional presentation where I will be guiding us through a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm also hoping that it is a senseful journey that we're moving through, not simply theoretical. And I invite us to arrive by feeling into the flocking movement of these murmurations of starlings. This presentation is called Thinking Transversally, Sensing Wholeness Through a Pluriverse of Perspectives. And again, I feel so lucky through the synchronicities of other speakers falling through, to be here sitting in front of you and able to share some of what I've been working on. So I actually took the opportunity when Pillay got in touch with me 2 weeks ago to just immerse myself in the field of cybernetics. I want to say more deeply, but there's only so much you can sink into over the course of 2 weeks with the times in between work and other meetings. But I really wanted to get a sense of what is this community, this group of people who are working in this lineage of information, of awareness, of observation. And all of this is actually tied to a degree that I took, a master's degree in strategic foresight and innovation. And my encounter with cybernetics first started with my professor, Peter Jones, who's actually here in this talk. He's now a good friend. And I remember him presenting this massive journey. Like, it felt like this like timeline that was huge. And it was this timeline of cybernetics. And honestly, looking at it was overwhelming because there's so many people, so many thinkers involved across so many fields. And really, I actually stepped away from that systems class sensing that entanglement of lineage, but never having had the chance to really deepen into what this field is really gesturing towards. So I've had this chance to really read some of the papers and actually listen to a lot of the talks that have been already hosted by the ASC. And one of the quotes that stood out to me, and that was the thread that really looped, I guess, my work with the explorations here, is a quote by Gordon Pask, where he says, "Cybernetics is the science of defensible metaphors." So I'm going to actually pick up this thread, this definition of cybernetics, and begin to weave through the work and the praxis that I've been involved in for the past couple of years. So I'll first introduce who I am. Of course, my name is Cheryl. I'm currently located geographically in Toronto, Canada. And in terms of my career, I've been a systemic designer and researcher and practitioner for the past 6-7 years. And one of the projects that I had been the most deeply involved with, I want to start there. It's called Nourish. And it was a project, it actually is still an ongoing project, that is a national systems change project that brings together food and healthcare stakeholders across the country, across Canada. And a lot of them are hospital leaders and equity-seeking groups. And really the goal was to understand what is the interconnection, the vital interconnection between people and planetary health, and how are healthcare stakeholders able to really understand their place in the larger system in terms of how they can participate in this greater wellness of the planet. So what we did was we organized cohorts of stakeholders, of leaders over the course of 2 years. And what we would do is actually bring them together from across the country to these embodied in-person retreats, often in nature-based settings. So sometimes BC, sometimes in Ontario, sometimes in Quebec. And these times that we spend together was really about sinking into relationship. So we often spend 2 to 3 days. We live together, we eat together, we work together, we design together. And really, we sit in circle. And this group is often, again, healthcare stakeholders who come in with their roles, come in with their jobs. And what we're hoping to do here is to begin to sink into who are we and what are we trying to accomplish together when we're really allowing ourselves to sink into interconnection. And what I noticed with the experience of these circles was that when we really presence together, something begins to happen. And it's really a felt sense of deepening intimacy, this feeling of the atmosphere actually thickening. And as we're sitting together, suddenly it feels less like we're individuals, less like we are simply wearing our hats and roles. And in fact, we begin to sense into something deeper and emerging. So I began to really be drawn to the mysterious happening in the midst of these circles. And now I might label it or call it a kind of numinous coherence. Christopher Alexander calls it a quality without a name. But really, it was this quality of a felt sense of wholeness. And then I wouldn't have used these words to describe it. But what we felt together was that quality of interconnectedness that often brought people to tears because they were so moved by what they were feeling. And with this quality that arises, we begin to come back into our systems and intervene with a very different way of seeing and being in the world. So I begin there. And I also want to share beyond my location, beyond my name, also my situated context and bias. I really come at this with this perspective that we're living in a time of planetary crisis and transition. And this is something that's not stated lightly. It's something that I feel like it calls me forward with a dedicated feeling and sense of action and participation. And something I have been observing, and with others as well, is that there's this quality of something collapsing. And here an image I have adapted from the adaptive cycle. For a long time, we've been in this front loop of growth and conservation, and perhaps we're moving actually into the phase of the back loop of release and reorganization. And this phase of the back loop, in terms of how it actually feels in our bodies, is incredibly uncomfortable. It's a felt sense of disintegration, of fragmentation, of decay and compost and chaos. And again, from my perspective and my situatedness, I'm feeling this across our social, cultural, ecological, technological systems at large. So I come at this work seeing what is this gap? What is this time between worlds where we're moving from a system in decline, something we've always known, towards what is emerging. So these emerging systems that we do not yet know. And the proposal is that this is actually a revolutionary time, and we are called to think and design differently. And I'm inspired by Donna Haraway, who writes, "It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories." So I want to take us on a metaphorical journey of a new type of story we might tell. And as we move from this system in decline to emerging systems, the call is for a discontinuous leap into the unknown. And I wonder about the possibility of moving towards planetary interbeing. And the question at the core of this work is, how do we embody systemic transition as a collective and trans-species effort? That's the seed. So I follow that experience of wholeness that I felt at the Nourish retreat, and also that question of what do we need to nurture in this time between worlds? And I take this journey of descent, of letting go. And this image here is Otto Scharmer's theory U superimposed over Sahil and Attila, the futurists, description of the causal layer analysis. So moving from litany, which is the understanding of the world on a much more kind of superficial known level, down to social causes, down to worldviews, and then really to the territory of myth and metaphor. And what it means to actually sink to myth and metaphor, it's not theoretical for me. It's actually uncanny. We begin to move into the fluid territory of the mythological, the spiritual, the cosmological, the metaphysical. These are really the foundations of how we've been seeing the world and designing. And what does it mean to actually question those foundations and begin to crack open what that looks and feels like? So I'll take us on some questioning of the core paradigms and also an appreciation. So first we have the universal, which is this view of one world. And I share it with actually an image of this beautiful globe. It's Buckminster Fuller, who's observing the optimism of spaceship Earth. So what does it mean for us as a human species to be cohabiting on this planet together? And how are we able to cooperate? And how are we able to live and create systems that cohere into that sense of one world? And the universal is actually beautiful as a vision in a lot of ways, because it allows us to really sense into our oneness, into the unifying knowledge that we are on this finite planet together. And at the same time, we're also feeling that the universal hides a lot of potential hubris and this kind of colonizing worldview that there is one way, one culture, one world that we all ought to participate in. And that is the kind of modern vision of globalism that we're also beginning to feel shaking at its foundations. So the pluriversal paradigm is something I'm really excited about because it begins to trouble that notion of one world. And this is the proposal of the world of many worlds. And the work of Arturo Escobar, who wrote Designs for the Pluriverse, is actually he's a very significant scholar who's influenced my work. And pluriversal design is this decolonization of the one world worldview, troubling the predominant idea in the West that we all live in one single world made of one underlying reality and many cultures. So what I really love about Arturo Escobar is he brings that kind of worldview with also design. So what does it mean to actually operate with this paradigm of many different worlds cohabiting together? And when we look at the many different worlds that exist, I like to see it as the human worlds. So the fact that among humans, with our various situated knowledges, we pluralize our many ways of seeing and living and being and knowing. But what is also invited into the pluriversal are the more than human worlds. So we're also on this planet with plants, with animals, with microbes, with technologies. And I also push us to think about it in terms of our stories, our spirits, our ancestors, our memes, and our myths. How are all of these actors actually mixing and colliding and really participating in this way of being and living together? So the pluriversal, I actually want to share this quote from Anna Singh, and she writes, as contamination changes world-making projects, mutual worlds and new directions may emerge. And I get excited actually about the tensions between the very different ways of being, the different ways of seeing. And there's this image here of the kind of co-weaving together that we do with these different actors and what it means in terms of how we change the way that we might language, how we might communicate, how we might share and dialogue about new worlds. So next, I take a leap to the transversal. And here I describe it as actually glimpses of wholeness, that quality without a name that I described that happened during the Nourish retreat. And I think I just want to do a quick, I guess, like love letter to why I feel drawn to the word transversal. So trans means etymologically across, through, on the other side, to go beyond. And actually in geometry, it is just a line that traverses two or other lines. So it's this quality of just being able to cross disciplines, cross planes, cross worlds. And I borrow this word from Deleuze and Guattari in transversal philosophy. And they really see the transversal as the creative rupture that they describe as the line of flight. So it's a radical departure that breaks with the territory of the known to become truly different in ways that cannot be anticipated. So that kind of creative rupture, that energy is something that I want, like that feels alive in this work. And then I also want to nod to transversal politics, which is also a field, and that really focuses on the dialogic. And this group really sees the transversal as a cosmopolitan praxis based on standpoint epistemology. So if the only way to approach the truth is through difference in perspectives, then what we do together is we dialogue. And then I also bring in transpersonal studies, which begins to kind of weave in the transcontextual. So I've been reading into transpersonal psychology, consciousness studies, awareness-based systems change, and social field theory to explore the felt experience of collaborative sense-making. And this work has actually been much more oriented towards the praxis, like I've been doing and involved with what that feels like. So the proposal for transversal thinking, just so I can contain in a definition, is to nurture the conditions of relational potential for the rupture of radical creativity. And really, transversal thinking is a mindset and posture that first orients around, and you know what, I don't want to say first, it's the simultaneous holding of the tensions of plural perspectives, of the many ways of seeing and being, and then also the capacity to sense the aliveness, that felt sense of perhaps autopoesis that might lead to the encounters of transversal wholeness. So those numinous moments where the us and the them, that kind of like friction, coheres into an emergent we. And this transversal we is not a totalizing, undifferentiated shared identity. So we're not just all one, or a fragmented collection of different irreconcilable parts. Really, the transversal we is processual. It is a dance. It is the transcontextual coalescence of becoming in and through complexity. And really, it is a glimpse into a living and becoming whole. So I've walked us through the paradigm and metaphysics of the universal, the one world, and the pluriversal, the world of many worlds. And I wonder, actually, in the generative tension between these two ways of seeing, between the one and the many, the global and the local, unity and difference, the modernist and the pluralist, I feel like there's actually this way of simultaneously holding the two in their tensions that begins to create that leap towards the transversal. So these momentary glimpses of wholeness. So we move from the one to the many to the whole, from the global and the local to the fractal, from needing to be unified and or different to what does it mean to be actually in harmony with one another. And I really see this as kind of actually sacred spiritual work. And I don't want to be nervous or hold back from naming the quality of spirituality, that kind of unnameable, numinous transversality that begins to be experienced in these glimpses of wholeness. And something that I really appreciated was when I was looking at this presentation and working it through, Pillay had actually sent me a paper. And as I was reading it, I found it very moving. And I'll read actually this quote from the paper that allowed me to get a sense of why there's this kinship, I guess. And she writes, I think that what Maturana is pointing to is that the fundamental difference between a transcendental ontology, so maybe what I would call the universal, and the constitutive one, the pluriversal, is emotional. One accepts or does not accept one or other of the two explanatory paths according to emotion, not reason. And this leap really is carried through the emotion that pertains to the acceptance of multiple realities, that is love. Love as that domain of relational behaviors in which the other arises as a legitimate other in coexistence with oneself. And I love this definition of love, this gesture towards love, as this tension and relationship with the other as also in coexistence with oneself. So what is that relationship between the self and the other that becomes that leap? So I've been moving more into kind of like a philosophical, theoretical territory, but really all of this knowing is doing. And I want to actually shift over to the work and praxis that I've been involved in for the last 2 years. And I pulled a quote from Joe Brewer, who's been doing a lot of on the ground work around earth regeneration. And he asked in a talk actually a couple of weeks ago, this question, which is, what does it feel like to be part of a pattern that is emerging? And that's the quality that I'm really drawn to. If we do not know what these patterns that we're participating in can look like from the outside as an outside observer, then what does it actually feel like in our bodies, in our experiences, in this place between worlds? So a lot of this research is living, it's action participatory research. And I want to actually describe it through a practice that I really love and have come to be very, I sense a lot of potential in it. And it's a practice that I began and I actually stumbled onto it about 1.5 years ago. Currently it's an online practice. So we're not even in person together. It's not like the Nourish retreat where we're physically in the same room living together. It's actually over Zoom. So this is all happening online through electronic connections. And what we do is we have a group of people come together and just be in relationship. However, instead of relating just to each other, we're actually relating to what we call the center or the middle. And that center in the middle is an emergent actor that gestures to what we call the collective field or the elusive whole. And this practice is created by Ria Bach, who is an incredible woman. And she did this, she basically carried forth 10 years of practice between her and a group of women, really looking at the possibilities and potential of creativity in the lineage of ancient circle practice. So we have this deep wisdom of ancient circle practice of embodied through Ria and her work. And it's actually happening on the internet over the course of the pandemic when we're all stuck inside our homes and actually seeking that connection. So when I stumbled onto this practice online, I realized that this practice is about cultivating the capacity and experience that I found so compelling when I was in Nourish and feeling that quality without a name. And the practice itself is actually pretty simple, but I'll first describe that what we do is we speak to the middle as a field of presence. And that social field is what Otto Scharmer describes as the quality of relationships that gives rise to the patterns of thinking, conversing, and organizing. So this social field might be seen as a system, an organization, an organism, or a collective body. But what we are is we're bounded by the number of people in a Zoom room, and then we're co-sensing together. So when we're together, what we do is we drop a burning inquiry into that field, and we begin to listen deeply. We check in, we listen to that question. Oftentimes we're actually in this kind of potency of silence, and we tune our awareness into the felt sense of what is present and alive. So instead of just speaking to the kind of mental models of this is what I want to share, this is my answer for this question that we're trying to answer in the middle, we're actually beginning to feel into what is coalescing in between us. And also we're called for to only speak when we sense that you are called to and from the center. So this is a very different way of sensing that begins to move actually from the head down to the body, and then actually connects this way of embodied and almost extended sensing. And the more that we practice this, I've been doing this for about 1.5 years, and we've moved across many different inquiries. The more that we are really shaping that quality of coherence, that quality of wholeness within the field. So this practice has been the core work that I've been involved with. And I want to, like, over the course of doing this practice, I began to really observe what it means to encounter wholeness. So that quality without a name that I described earlier. I began to really bring observation to the phenomena. So what is happening when we're speaking to the whole, when we're speaking to the field, when one is being sensing, allowing to come through. And I'm putting together really notes, and the last time I presented this, I had named this, and I want to name this upfront here, that anything I describe about this experience of wholeness from my own direct experience, from other practitioners and people who have experienced collective presencing and other circle practice in my work, these are attempts at naming something that is actually unnameable. So the map is certainly not the territory, and yet I do want to begin to make space for naming that unnameable boldly into what we can invite into explicit design and systems practice. So here, this is kind of an artful way of describing what that experience of wholeness feels like. So often it's this quality of collective epiphany, of numinous insight, of co-sensing this we. So I am not just an individual and atomized part, but we are part of something larger. And there's this quality of spiritual diaphaneity, so that we begin to feel time and space actually quite differently. And there's also these senseful indicators of coherence. So what does it begin to feel like when wholeness is arising? So I've been exploring it in terms of intensity. So this buildup of energy, of potency. So this quality of thickening potential, but then also integrity. So how is it beginning to feel aligned? And then verity. And this is when I name truth, it's not like this capital T, we know what is true now. But again, that truth that is sensed in the middle between many different perspectives, holding that resonance. And then the other quality of wholeness is that this image that I actually drew is kind of an illustrated articulation of what it feels like. And if you imagine that this circle of circles are the people who are coming together and sensing into the middle, there's also this quality of the wholeness is nested and it's fractal. And the more that I feel communal, collective wholeness, that actually arises also out of this feeling of wholeness within the self. So again, there's this like very processual, nested movement of many different parts becoming wholes. And really that's the best of how I can describe it. But I'm really curious about what is this quality of kind of the crystallization of feeling like you're part of an emergent we. And there's this quote from Benita Roy, who's also an important teacher that I've encountered over the course of this work. And she describes, when one takes up an intimate science with life, everything is found to be a field of relationships, both nested and open, patterns that weave in love, wonder, and joy, that course as rivers in a floating sea of becoming. So somehow these words very poetically begin to express what that quality of deep intimacy with life and becoming. So I'll begin to shift over to the experience of wholeness, to what it means to actually design the conditions for the experience of that wholeness. So this section is really about morphing. So Ria Bach, the person who wrote the book, she describes the principled design approach, morphing from operating on systems. So I'm looking at a system and trying to fix it or find interventions, to dialoguing with systems, to actually designing as the system. So you're in it, you're dancing with it, you are the system. And I want to share actually this image of a living bridge as well, because this is a living root bridge from the Khasi tribe in northern India. And a friend of mine had shared this as this beautiful living embodiment of the generational thinking that it takes to co-weave these bridges with the environment, with the ecology, with the place that you're embedded in. And these bridges actually take decades and decades to be able to grow. And the people who build it are actually in this fluid reciprocal dance with their environment. And ultimately, when these bridges actually build over time, they become much more, like far more resilient than any other human-made bridge that we're able to create. So this is the kind of design that I'm curious about moving towards. Design as poesis. So of course, autopoesis, this kind of sense of self-organization from Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela. I really can design, really move in that self-organizing way. And I want to actually weave in other ideas of poesis. So Donna Haraway's symbiosis. So this relationality, this deep relationality of making with, again, between humans, cultures, worlds, and also more than human cultures and worlds. And also Nora Bateson, who had just recently written a paper called Afani Poesis, which she describes as unseen becoming. And that's all of the becoming that you actually cannot see and you can never see, and yet is part of that process of becoming and creation. And then lastly, I also want to invite in cosmopoesis, which is world discovery and creation. And this actually comes from an important Buddhist Dharma teacher, Rob Rubeya, to me. And really, it's reigniting the capacity of humans and the unique ability for us to really imagine new worlds and access the possibility and potential of imagination to be able to create these transversal leaps into worlds that we cannot currently even know. So when I look at the potential of transversal design within systems, this quote from Bayo Akomolafe, who is a philosopher, really comes to mind, which is, the times are urgent, let us slow down. because I often feel in the field of systemic design and change, this feeling of when we're in crisis, we're very much moved towards fixing. We're very much moved towards, as quickly as possible, coming up with solutions and interventions. And yet, what we're called to do as we're feeling into that subtle aliveness is to begin to move from fixing to relating, from the sense of mastery to embracing mystery and not knowing, from seeking truth to actually trust, and then moving from that wariness, this feeling of we are in a time of not knowing, and can that actually invite wonder? So the early sketches of a transversal design process is to really invite that space between worlds, what I had illustrated of the back loop of collapsing systems that need to make that leap towards the emerging systems that we do not yet know, and seeing that as part of a design process of divergence and convergence, with that messy middle, that place where we often call it the magic of design, where there's some kind of abductive leap. We kind of sense into all of the problems, the possibility, the potential in this space between worlds. And I want to propose that actually as a ritual space, and for us to really invite the properties of ritual into design. And what does it mean for the way that we invite stakeholders and different parts of the system together into a room to invite these people and other more than human actors potentially into this process of entry, moving into this ritual space of the unknown, of encounter with the seen and the unseen, the spoken and the unspoken, and then allowing whatever to arise to become something that is truly embodied and transformative before we begin to take that into our everyday lives and systems of which we are a part. And when we invite ritual, we also invite a different sense of time. So we move from chronos, this way of seeing time as linear, cause and effect as direct, into kairos, which is radial and right time. And when I describe that quality of wholeness, there is this sense of feeling like you're contained in something that's deeper, that's vertical, that spirals, and accessing actually something that is deeply unseen and touching something very mysterious. And perhaps in these sanctuaries, in the cracks of the systems that are collapsing, we begin to see these and experience these glimpses of wholeness. So as a designer, we play a lot with materials, and I want to invite us to think about the immaterials also of design. So in this ritual space, what does it mean for us to invite mystery as a design material? So this invocation of the unknown, or time as a design material. So what if past and future are here and something we can work with? Emptiness as a design material. So this sense of codependent arising, sacredness, eros, silence, and soul. So these poetic invocations of design immaterials, really metaphors, allows us hopefully to begin to feel into what this felt sense, this skillfulness, this attenuation towards the wholeness that we're hoping to be able to cultivate. And again, the transversal mindset and posture to really develop the embodied, extended cognitive capacity to experience the collective body as sensing organism. Because what we're here to do is to become sensitive to what wants to emerge between us. And I have these design principles for transversal wholeness as well, which hopefully become offerings of paradox. So wholeness is emergent and ephemeral. Wholeness is glimpsed through the particular. Wholeness is transcontextual. Wholeness is felt and sensed, not understood and mapped. Wholeness is already present and always becoming. And as I reach the end, I want to read slowly this quote by Christopher Alexander. When you build a thing, you cannot merely build that thing in isolation, but must repair the world around it and within it, so that the larger world at that one place becomes more coherent and more whole, and the thing which you make takes its place in the web of nature as you make it. So how do we invite wholeness as both an act of creation and as healing? Here, I just want to name that this is a weaving of many different swarms of people, of thinkers that are currently actually doing this work of thinking about designing for emergence, sensing emergence. So I am certainly not alone. I am an actor, a starling in a larger swarm. And hopefully we can explore this territory together as a collective. And I'll finish here.
Thank you, Cheryl. I have been looking at that, and there's a lot of enthusiasm there for your work. And I guess we should just give her an applause first and then get started with the questions. There haven't been a lot of direct questions. There have been a lot of comments, but I'll go back to Peter. You've spoken texted several times, and one was love as a fusion of consciousness and second order hopes for the future. Do you want to speak to that and maybe start a bit of a conversation?
Oh, okay. Well, there was a point in the present right after the drawing, and your beautiful drawing, Cheryl, and that actually spun off quite a bit of a response in the chat. And so the response that I had was just in thinking about the nature of love as a fusion of different consciousnesses finding wholes, maybe in a mysterious way, in this kind of more of a feed forward than feedback. We often think of maybe interpersonal love as being a feedback loop, that we have positive expectations and anticipation, and there's that. But there's something about your drawing that shows the ineffable, the numinous quality of creating something, that something is created in love that's mysterious and that's beyond where we know it's going. And it might be not a feedback process based on what's known, but a feed forward that is transcending our own loops, that is becoming, that's growing into this mysterious space that you've spoken of a lot, and with the other speakers that you refer to as well. So the question, I guess, would be, interpreting from that drawing, which, if you think about it of course, I start to think about it as almost a system model, as loops that are relevant to, points of consciousness, energy, relationship into a fusion. How do you reflect on the creation of love in this space that you've described in that drawing?
Yeah, it is interesting. So I want to share some context on that drawing, which is that I actually drew it when I was on a 3-month monastic retreat. So it had come out of this experience of deep meditation with a group of other people as well. And I remember actually when I was drawing it, it had this kind of like hypnotizing quality of, this is what a kind of whole awareness feels like. And I'm not sure if it was explicit, but it was almost like I was pulled into this dance of drawing it. And then it was interesting because after I drew it, I began to look at other imagery of toruses, of these kind of spheres. I was also kind of inspired by Peter Sloterdijk's like spherology. So these ways of really understanding or sensing sacred experience as very whole and spherical. And then when I began to really then pull it into a systems context, I thought it was really interesting because when I was training as a student, we did a lot of systems diagrams of drawing feedback loops and just creating these like incredibly complex maps, trying to understand different actors and their relationships. And when I saw this torus, actually the sphere, as a systems diagram, I began to really feel into the energy actually of that kind of recursion, to have these multiple perspectives, these plural perspectives that begin to sense into the middle, but the middle is never actually seen. It's not an object. It's not necessarily like something you can, it's empty actually at the core. And I'm curious about how we're relating in systems to the immaterial, to the sacred, to love as this quality that arises through relationships. And I'm not really sure, like I think so much of how I've been doing like the practice of collective presencing, it feels less like anytime I try to kind of draw out the process, I guess in a very causal way, it feels very fixed. And then I move towards the kind of liminal poetic expression, and I begin to draw like images of water flowing in and meeting and different ripples beginning to make contact and diffract, or images of spirals and fire. And then that actually feels much closer to what that quality is. So I'm curious about how we begin to invite, I guess, other creative forms of expression when we're beginning to express the numinous within systems.
I have to say, I really appreciate how much more can be expressed in raising an image like that, and then just the expression around the image, the discussion of it. It's a very different conversation than raising it as a concept and then disassembling it. Natalia had a really interesting question about this as well.
Yes, that's why I went to go there. Now let the people who've got hands up know there's just a little bit of stuff catching up in the chat. Then we'll get to the hands up as well. So Natalia, you had it, and you take up with the participatory approach. Could you please enlarge on that?
Sure. So I know we've talked about this before, but I wanted to understand your conception of Eros and Agape and why you chose to orient them in that particular way within the Torrid, and how you see Eros connecting across the other, and the function that it serves.
It's a good question, and it is interesting because it came up so intuitively, and even just like that description of the quality and materiality of love. Of course, there are so many different forms and qualities of love, but when I feel into agape, which is the love of the sacred, the love of the whole, the love of, it's actually really divine love. It's held in this wonder, the sense of wholeness, the sense of interconnection. And often when I feel into a field that a group of people actually come together around, this kind of open awareness, it is this way of arriving with openness and wonder and this feel like this desire or this love of mystery of what is about, of what might emerge. So that's why I did feel it in a horizontal plane of that like kind of widening of the field of potential through collective awe and wonder. And then the vertical, there was something that, so Eros, the term also gestures to this quality of aliveness. So how are we called through our desires? What kind of like allows me to move forward through this kind of natural aliveness and desire and love that kind of erupts through my body and my whole being. And often like that verticality, when we're holding a field together, it's Eros that there's that open wonder, and then it's Eros that allows us to actually begin to draw from potential into manifestation. It's that actually that like raw wanting and desire of humans, that capacity to really, and it's really life. It's like life has this desire to create more life. There's like, life is the desire to create more life. So what is the Eros that allows us to then create new worlds out of these communal fields? So I really kind of feel the tension actually of the two poles as the way in which we begin to radiate out new worlds into becoming.
Shantanu had a call. I'm just trying to scroll back up, way back in 1938. When you take a participatory action approach to implement transformation to programs, how do you combat sometimes radical changes that need to make their design based on particular real-time experiences? So could you speak to that? And we'll try and get on to the hands up questions too, please.
Is it okay? Can we clarify that question, or who?
Shantanu, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here. I can clarify it.
Mhm.
So from what I understand, the program that you implemented involved, a participatory action research approach, where you sort of went and engaged in this process of, collective discovery with the participants of your program to really understand where they were socioculturally, to sort of meet their needs. And I think Peter Jones already sort of spoke to this a bit in the chat, but I want to hear your thoughts about it as well, because I'm working on PAR right now in schools, where we're designing learning environments for kids based on practitioner needs. And very often, we go in with this prototype to design things. And then, sometimes you need to overhaul it based on what you see and where those people are at that point of time. So I just want to know how you navigate those radical changes that may come up to, create transformation that you seek to make in those social contexts.
Yeah, thank you, Shantanu. And I appreciate the groundedness of your question as well. And a lot of what I'll describe actually comes from my experience with Nourish, the systems change project, which was actually funded and resourced by the McConnell Foundation in Canada. And what I found actually amazing about participating in this project was that there was this sense of really opening up to the need for cultivating the quality of relationships first, before we're able to then understand what are the kinds of interventions and needs that we have to meet. And we actually did a lot of work. So like often kind of typical funding models is you have to know exactly the outcome you're trying to achieve. And then you write that into your grant and your proposal and you say, okay, this is the path we're going to take in order to achieve this exact outcome in this solution. But what we do need to create space more for is this kind of resourcing of emergent innovation, where we really don't know what is going to become. And we actually brought in tools like developmental evaluation and also principles-based evaluation. So ways in which, while we're navigating that territory of the unknown, of learning the kind of like next steps that you're taking on the journey as you're taking them, there is also this, it's like, what is the compass of principles or values that we're always coming back to ensure that we're orienting around this collective, I guess, agreed upon sense of like what success would feel like. So it's less about the concrete, this is how many people will be impacted and this is how many hospitals will do this, but actually much more about again, sensing into the quality of the relationships, much more of the, actually kind of like interviewing people and talking to people and understanding, do you feel like your organizational culture, the whole kind of field that you're in is changing because of the work that's happening? But it is hard. It's hard because it's easy to want to bring it down back to the quantifiable metrics. Mm-hmm.
Michael Hall has had his hand up for a while now, and then there's further questions. I'm using a temporal order just as a headline.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Cheryl, for this wonderful, inspirational presentation. My question, well, it's difficult to put it in a sentence. I really loved how you pulled a lot of loose things for me together into this wonderful new framework of the transversal. And I very much loved how suddenly mystery and uncertainty and all, and Eros and everything found its place in this framework. When I think of transition design, you've got the model 1, 2, 3, 4. At the bottom, you have posture and mindset, where it's about being a learner, and being humble. And yes, we are experts in one thing, but the others are experts in other things, and we all learn from one another. And one thing so you emphasize now how important it is that everyone comes together in a sort of harmonious relation, build strong relationships amongst one another, and agree perhaps on some values and shared beliefs and so on of a direction how we should go and where we are going. But at the same time, and this is the important point where I'm at the moment, is when we are learners in this ambiguous situation, it is often connected with frustration, and it's all the uncertainty, and we are confused, we feel incompetent, we feel, and perhaps even unsure if this is correct and right what we are doing, And it's one thing to sit in the circle and together over a long period of time think and language about a particular concept, and another one going out and trying to really change the world, where you meet people that are authoritarian and think totally different than you and are materialistic and so on. So how do we negotiate that with our confusion and uncertainty?
Yeah, there's the word that comes to mind is sanctuary. And I find that practices, ritual spaces like collective presencing, or containers that are so focused on the cultivation and nurturing of relationships. And I do want to actually emphasize that the process of being in these sanctuaries isn't necessarily about agreeing or feeling like we're all on the same page. If anything, it's about the aliveness and the invitation to come in with your unique values and your unique perspectives, some of which might actually bump up against and be in tension with others. And something that I really love about collective presencing is because we're not speaking to each other. So if a person across from me says something or describes an experience in their life that, makes me feel contracted, or I don't really agree with that, I don't need to talk to that person directly. I don't speak to that person. It's shared to the center, and whatever, and it becomes kind of like part of whatever we're co-creating together. And often, actually, that capacity to hold tension is one that we are building, because it can get very tense. It can get very intense. And sometimes you're learning about, we have different political values, and I've been doing this work with you for the past 3 months. I didn't know that. But something happens in these circles where, because they're so focused on, again, because they're focused on love. It's like kind of like family, where you're at the dinner table and you know that your aunt or your grandfather kind of like has an opinion that gets you really annoyed, but you still love them. Like there's still this sense of kinship. So I don't really know what it means to create that type of bond, these bonds of love and kinship with people who are outside of your blood relations, of like whatever we define as family. But I do think like as we're beginning to cultivate these spaces, they are sanctuaries. They're sanctuaries to allow people to show up and be with their differences and still be loved. And then what happens when you enter sanctuaries is that they nourish you. They energize you, they're regenerative. And the truth is, you don't stay in sanctuaries forever. Like you have to leave the sanctuary to be out in the world. Really, we're still in the world ultimately, but there are these spaces, these containers that nourish you. And then there are the spaces and environments that you enter where you have to allow that nourishing to keep you strong enough to be able to face like the really difficult tensions and conflicts. And frankly, I started my presentation with this proposal that we are in a time of collapse. And when I really deepen into my sense of that, and I allow myself to feel it into the full grief of what that means, it's going to be hard for a very long time, if not my entire lifetime. There's no quick fixes for what we're dealing and facing with together. And it feels like this leaning towards love and forming relationships is what will build the resilience for us to be able to move through this transition together. So I think that's what these sanctuaries are really for.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to ask Claire now to talk about something that relates to what you were just talking about. She's asking what kind of cultural scaffolding do we need to enable this kind of going forward? Claire, could you enlarge on that, please?
Sure. Yeah, Cheryl, thank you so much. That was amazing. Yeah, I'm really aware of the kind of roles, social roles, jobs that exist. Not many, and in fact, like very few, and the ones that have don't really provide the support for that transversal bridging between, like, the work that needs to be done, so that when you incubate together, when you go into that, sorry, I'm missing the word that you just used, the seclusion, like where you're together, you're supporting each other. And yeah, there's just those roles don't seem to be very prominent in Western market-based societies. I think in societies that are much more we're communally based, I think you do see more of that, but I don't think we've developed that very well. And I'm just wondering if there's, in your looking around, if there are roles, and I guess I'm thinking about it as scaffolding that can help support a transit, like nurturing, incubating the work that we all need to be supported in. Because yeah, the opposite right now just feels like we're very much based on competition, and as you said, like this, the Chronos time is like predominant. So
Yeah, Claire, I mean, you're the one who introduced me to Joe Brewer and his work with earth regenerators. And I found myself very struck by his description of, one, the lack of cultural scaffolding that we have, the lack of conditions that are already designed for us to be able to form the kinds of intimate, love-based relationships that we need to be able to live together, to survive together, to transition together. And it's not so much that the wisdom isn't there. I think what's happening is we're seeing so many different people, groups, collectives, scholars, disciplines be able to draw up from, whether it's like spiritual wisdoms from religions and spirituality to, I mean, here it's like the field of cybernetics. When I was reading the work of Hines and coming back to Varela and Maturana, it's like all of it's here. Like we kind of have actually a lot of the wisdom, and what does it mean? And I guess that's probably that's why I consider myself a designer. And even as I say the word design, like sometimes there is actually a bit of fear, because we're being called to create something that doesn't exist yet, to create the kinds of cultural scaffolding and social scaffolding that we need to be able to cross this chasm. And there is something very scary, like for me personally, about the fact that every step that I'm taking feels like I'm looking over the void, honestly. And then what happens is a step is taken and it turns out it's held by relationships. And the bridge that I'm actually walking is created with every step that I take. But it's like every single time there is like that, I'm scared. Like the unknown is exhilarating and exciting, and it's also frightening. So I think right now it feels really important to acknowledge that it's that aliveness that we feel that can feel like fear, but can also be wonder, is what we need to face together, confront together, and we need to hold spaces for that type of work. And it's in the resilience of that holding that we're actually able to create, because otherwise it's really too much for any one individual to hold.
thank you.
So, Kim Peter, I believe, and then you had I'm losing track, but I don't remember. I wrote down your name. there was not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really, thank you. And thank you, Cheryl. Wonderful to see you in this context. Yeah, I'm just thinking about ritual in relationship to that, the end of things where you're setting up a project and you're trying to show that it's going to have outcomes. In actuality, you really don't even know what those outcomes are. And you talked about the introduction of ritual into the group situation, but I feel like that's once you're in it, it's been accepted to a point. But how do you deal with it at the end where you're essentially trying to prove the value of something before you can even start the engagement? Any thoughts on that?
It's an interesting, I'm just going to speak from what's arising, which is that how we articulate and communicate what we value needs to begin to look and feel different in the way that we give and receive. I think often when we talk about value, it is very much about what is quantifiable, what is seen, what is understood, what can be kind of packaged and listed, whether it's in a grant or in some kind of company offering. And there's something about value that is in the felt experience of relationships and relationing. And I guess like what I'm doing here in many ways by doing this presentation, inviting all of you into this world that I really love. It's like I'm creating a defensible metaphor for the field of cybernetics. I want to say, this is something that I'm passionate about. This is something that draws out the kind of care and love and wonder that I hope more people can see and witness and then be drawn into, like birds in a murmuration. And I think it's hard because like I have been sometimes looking at this crossroads between, do I need to, like, what does it mean to really bridge, I guess? Like, do I have to translate all of this value that I can feel in my body that's like changed the way that I sense we can live and be in the world into what can be packaged up for the funders? Like there's probably like a yes actually in there. But I think what I feel very motivated by is to maintain the quality of the resonance, the quality of the intimacy, the quality of the passion and the love. And so much of that is just like sitting here in front of you speaking and hoping that you are called to love as much as I am.
I'm going to leave time for Jude to explain our next presentation, and I'm going to encourage you all to scan up the chat to about 10 o'clock to quickly read a pretty little poem. Well, not pretty little, isn't it? A poem that inspired me. But for now, Elena, you have a question, and then we'll try and bring this to a close before the half hour.
Okay, first, thank you for a wonderful presentation. What I'm wondering is if this approach could allow us to help construct a societal immune system. We've got so much in the way of people promulgating fear and division, and I think we need to work on a kind of a social immune system. Could this help?
I mean, there's something very provocative about the idea of a social immune system. I'm not sure if I know enough about what that is to say yes or no, except for, yeah, there is, like when I hear the word immune system, it is kind of this like gathering of energy in order to, I mean, there's one way of seeing it that's in order to fight off something, but then there also is this like the work of maintaining balance and health. And I guess when I see it that way, like that, the capacity for us to be able to find sanctuaries and create spaces where we can really focus on healing and wholeness, and relationships, that probably is the immune system, the weaving together of the relationships across the planet. Yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking primarily of that second one, of not getting better after you're sick, but of warding off getting sick in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really resonates. That actually reminds me of, Pillay had done a presentation at RSD, I think 8 a couple of years ago, or 7, but it was called The Soul of Resilience. And it was really about the kind of ecology. You know what, I'm always worried about trying to summarize it, because it was beautiful and soulful, but just this capacity for us to form relationships as the kind of immune system of relationships feels in essence like the work here.
Thank you. Thank you.